let me just set the stage of how huge Baldur's Gate 3 actually is, okay? Because the game is ridiculous. This is a video from the one and only Fextralife. Let me paste the video link in there. There you go. And this video just breaks down how this game, like how big it is, because it is outrageous. This game has more endings than you can shake a stick at, than you can shake a bush at, really. It's insane. This game is ridiculous in its scope. And not just like big map or like tons of characters. The level of interactability, of branching dialogue and narratives, where one choice 10 hours ago comes back to totally change the story later on. It's baffling. And if you've never played one of these games and you don't really understand the scope, maybe this video will explain it, but it's like outrageous how huge this series and this game is. These guys, Larian Studios, are wizards.
This is going to be our 6th video talking about Baldur's Gate 3 from things we learned while we were playing with Larian again a week ago. And in this video, I want to talk a bit about the size of Baldur's Gate 3 and replayability of this game. I've talked a little bit about why I think Baldur's Gate 3 is going to win Game of the Year, and I think this is probably one of the more compelling reasons. So let's get into that. So,
win Game of the Year? Oh, baby, that's... This year's going to be tough, dude. We've got... What are the front runners? We've got, of course, Tears of the Kingdom. I think probably they throw a nod to Armored Core. That just seems like a layup. There was another big one earlier this year, wasn't there? Starfield, maybe Starfield gets a nod. Yeah, Redfall. Calm down. Like Jedi Survivor might get on some people's list. Diablo 4, I think, definitely gets nominated. Hogwarts Legacy, that's the one I was thinking. Hogwarts Legacy is going to be the tricky one. It might get nominated. I'm not sure if they let it win. But when you talk about like Person of the Year, you know how Times does that thing where they name Person of the Year, and like Adolf Hitler won Person of the Year back in, was it 39 or 33 or something? Like, it doesn't mean that they're good or like the best person in the world. It just means that they are the most influential, right? Like they were the biggest person on the world stage for that year, right? Like they dominated the discussion. They were in everybody's minds, that kind of thing. They were the person of the year. And for gaming, it's sort of similar, though I think because it's an award show, like most people would think of it as what's the best game of the year. But based on past winners, I don't think that's necessarily the case. Usually it's a mixture of the quality of the game and the influence it had on the industry. And it's hard to say that The Witcher, or not The Witcher, though The Witcher 3 is amazing. It's hard to say that any other game this year has had the same impact that Hogwarts Legacy had. That game was gigantic. It was ridiculous how big that game was. Just in pop culture, everybody was talking about it. People that aren't even hardcore gamers that I know were talking about Hogwarts Legacy. It was wild. I don't think it's the best game that's released this year, but it's hard to say that any other game so far has had the same mass market appeal. It's just wild how big that game was. But anyway, hearing that this game might get nominated or potentially even win, that would be amazing. Talk about what a triumph that would be for more hardcore gamers to have like a really serious RPG win. Ooh, that would be amazing.
First, let's just take a look at something we know to be fact. There are 174 hours of cutscenes in Baldur's Gate 3. What does that mean?
Okay, I'll shut up, but Jesus, 174 hours. Yeah, this is a game that you're going to be playing and you need to like listen to. I've said before, like there are some games where I am what I call like a South Park gamer or a Family Guy gamer, where I will be playing the game and then I have South Park or Family Guy pulled up on a second monitor. Some games work for that. This is not one of them. This is a game where you need to pay attention. And if you pay attention, it's going to be one of the most like rewarding and seriously like magical experiences of your life. But if you're like half distracted, you're just going to go crazy because you're like, oh my God, the cutscenes never end. Jesus, shut up. You know? You have to be a little patient. And for people like me that are kind of, as you can see in this segment already, a little bit ADHD, a little bit of that going on, where you're bouncing around, mind's moving a mile a second. it can be tough. But trust me, pop an edible or something, vibe and chill, just relax, and you'll be blown away at just how rewarding these narratives can be with the branching storylines. It's crazy. Okay,
Obviously, that does not mean that you will see 174 hours of cutscenes, or you should be worried that you're watching the longest movie in the history of gaming. What this means is that the width or breadth of Baldur's Gate 3 is likely larger than anything we've ever seen before in gaming. This means the absolute variety of things that can happen in the game based on your decisions, your class, your subclass, your race, your companions, how your companions feel about you in the moment versus how they felt about you 10 hours ago from the decisions that you made. All these things are going to impact what you see in your playthrough, and the number that we're really missing here is the average amount of cutscene you'll see in a single playthrough.
Yeah, that's important to note. Just because a game has all that doesn't mean that you're going to see it. It's the same exact thing that happened when people were like, oh, did you hear that like Fallout 4 has 200,000 lines of dialogue? Isn't that crazy? It's like, yeah, you're probably only going to hear like 10,000 or something. Like, you're probably not going to hear all of that because that's insane. Maybe if you're like one of these completionists that like puts 3,000 hours in, maybe then. But you'd hope that over like 3,000 hours of gameplay, you'd hear thousands of lines of dialogue, especially in a game that's like relatively narrative focused. So yeah, I'd hope so. Sure would. But it's a good point. Just because it has 174 hours of cutscenes doesn't mean you're going to see every single one of them. Because a lot of this is tied up in like side content, side quests, and that's not something everybody's going to see.
If we had that number, we would have a much better idea of gameplay hours, but you'd also have a much better idea of possible variations. Now, I expect a lot of people to have similar playthroughs with subtle differences. That's probably going to be the case for a lot of people, particularly people who are going for like a good playthrough. They will probably have very similar good playthroughs, but they're not everything's going to be the same, right? Because their companions are going to be different. The class is going to be different. Their race is going to be different. These are
real quick. I want to know from chat, everybody, can you tell me what your typical playthrough is? Do you just kind of float by and do what's kind of what feels right in the moment? You're kind of role playing as yourself, or do you go into playthroughs of games like this with a very specific archetype in mind? Because I've gone through and done like Jesus playthroughs or Satan playthroughs where I will play as just a maniac, or I'll play as Jesus, you know, where I'm just going around and I get really into whatever the in-game religion is, and I'm just like, I'm a pacifist and I don't do anything bad. Like, I've tried all those and they can be pretty fun. You can get yourself into some really wacky situations doing that. Because you really see, like, how does the game handle extremes? How does the game handle me being a mass murdering psychopath? How does the game handle me being really goody two-shoes and not wanting to engage in any sort of violent conflict whatsoever? Some games are really good at handling it, like Fallout New Vegas, for example. Other games like Fallout 4 are really, really bad at handling those extremes. Like, you try to kill main story characters in Fallout 4, it just doesn't work. It just breaks.
They're going to change some of the encounters they have and how they're handled. In my discussions with Larian, like in terms of the game's length at the event, I was told between 60 to 80 hours of gameplay clear a single playthrough. I think we can all expect more than that. I think this is a modest number from what I've seen so far. We know that early access is about a quarter of the game. Early access, my first playthrough took me about 30.
Whoa, wait. Early access is only a quarter of the game. Dude, I dipped my toes in this like a year and a half ago, whenever it was, I don't even remember. But I saw the Baldur's Gate 3 stuff, early access. Oh, that's probably worth a try. And so I popped in, I played a handful of hours. And then I was like, this is so good. I'm going to wait until the official game comes out, because I probably just put in maybe a quarter of the early access stuff. So I'm probably, starting to see spoilers and stuff. I'll just wait till final release. And you're telling me that is only like the whole early access is only 25%. So I only dipped my toes in. I probably didn't even get out of the introduction or the prologue. That's madness, dude. That's ridiculous.
Hours, and I was being thorough, and I'm still sure I missed stuff on my first playthrough. So I think if that's a quarter, you're probably looking at 100, 120 hours-ish on a single playthrough if you're a very thorough person who just doesn't rush the game. And obviously, probably if you're playing Tactician, it might be a little bit slower. Depending on how good you are at combat, these things can fluctuate a bit. But if we're just, factoring in what we've been told so far, I think you're looking at somewhere around 100 to 120 hours of gameplay for a single playthrough, which is about roughly what DOS 1 and DOS 2 were in a playthrough as well. So that sort of makes sense to me in terms of the length of the game. And you might be thinking,
That's
well,
madness.
with 174 hours of cutscenes, it's got to be longer than that. There's no way a playthrough plays that. But again, I think this 174 hours of cutscenes just means that unlike DOS 1 and DOS 2, even though there were a myriad of ways you could handle different scenarios, I think that it's more about the path that you take. There are a lot more paths. You know, maybe in DOS 1 and DOS 2, there were 5 paths you could take to get to the end. Maybe there are 10 paths or 15 paths or 20 paths or, you know, and I'm just talking about core paths here, not like the little details that change, which we know this will be different from playthrough to playthrough. But I'm just talking in terms of directions you can go, ways you can get to the end of the game. I think the difference between those games and this game is really that there's going to be more ways and more freedom to play through Baldur's Gate 3 than in DOS 1 and DOS 2. And something that was really interesting is I spent some time talking to Crystal, who's one of the lead writers on the project, and she's working predominantly on the ending of the game. And she's been working on that for 6 months, right? Just the ending of the game, which is incredible. And
I just don't even know where you start. Like, if you're working on one of these games, what do you even do? You sit down, you're like, okay, we're gonna, like, do you start at the end and then work yourself backwards? Do you just kind of write it and then see where it goes? I don't even know, because there's just so much here. So much to account for. It's madness. Maybe they do just kind of stumble their way through it. They're like, yeah, we'll figure it out. I don't know. Oh man, it's just outrageous.
Asked her, how many variations of the ending are there? And she told me that there were 17,000 variations of the ending. Now, that was the exact number she gave me, 17,000. Now, we know that that's not going to be like the main story. There isn't 17,000 main story endings, but that's obviously factoring in all the permeations and variables that a player can have. So there are essentially probably something like 17,000 different possible endings based on the decisions that you make. So that means 17,000 people could theoretically play and see something different on the ending screen. Now, that is a completely staggering number. And obviously,
I want to be clear here. We've given like Todd Howard crap because he said that Fallout 3 had 200 different endings. And if you've played Fallout 3, you know there's like 2. Like, no, there's not. There's not 200 different endings. But he said in the marketing campaign leading up to that there were 200 different endings. And that was just ridiculous. And I think what he did is he counted it like where, oh, this character, you finish the story, maybe you chose to like do the happy ending, the good ending. And so there's a good and bad parent ending. And then underneath all of that, they consider, okay, did you blow up Megaton? Did this person live? Did you kill this person? Did you help this radio station? And they count all of that as a different ending, which to me is like kind of a sneaky way of counting the endings. Because everybody, when you hear, oh, there's 200 endings, you think like, okay, 200 different instances of the ending. Like in The Witcher 3, okay, did Ciri survive? Did Ciri go and become Empress? Did Ciri go and become a Witcher with Geralt? All of that would be considered different. Whereas like, oh, I spared this person in a side quest, so that's its own ending now. Like, that seems a little sneaky to me. But the 17K number is absolutely crazy, and I would like to know more info of how they calculated that, you know? Like, does that include side stuff, or is that just permutations or permeations within the main story?
some of these, again, are just subtle minor differences, but I have never heard of another RPG ever mentioning that number or would ever even come close to that number in the number that they said. So I asked her, I said, okay, well, those are probably small differences. What about main differences in the ending, like main ending differences? Mm-hmm. She didn't have a number for me. She didn't know the answer. And I believe her when she says that, which means probably that the number is too big to think with, you know, with just a small amount of time to think about it, right? Like, she'd have to sit there and actually think about it.
He just asks her, how many permeations, I can't talk today. How many different endings are there just with main story content? And then she just pauses. Ah! Oh, my brain, it hurts. Ah! And it just starts to melt. That's what, like, that's the vibe I'm getting from this. It seems like it's insane how many different endings there are. And I cannot wait for when this launches and the subreddits and stuff start to actually calculate using spreadsheets how many different endings there are. Because either they're going to be really proud of the 17K number and what they've been saying, or they're going to be called out for some BS.
She couldn't just give me an off-the-cuff answer, which means it's probably a big number. I'm not saying it's anywhere near 17,000. I don't think it's even close to that. But it's not like 5. You know what I mean? So the main ending is probably going to have a lot of variation as well, which means that this game has a lot of replayability because people are going to want to see things from different perspectives. If you take a look at some of the all-time great RPGs like Knights of the Old Republic, Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, Fallout 1 and 2, old BioWare games like Dragon Age Origins, Mass Effect, these type of games where there are a lot of important decisions, things aren't always easy to decide, and there are different endings depending on what you do throughout the course of the game. I think it's safe to say that very few people play these games once. almost everyone who's played these games has played them through multiple times to see things from different perspectives, to do a good playthrough, to do a bad playthrough, to do somewhere in the middle playthrough. I think most people have minimally played these games twice, probably likely 3 times, and some people even more than that. So when you talk about Baldur's Gate 3 having all these 174 hours of cutscenes, 17,000 variations of endings, I don't know how many actual variations of the main ending, you're talking about lots of playthroughs here where you're seeing stuff you didn't see in previous playthroughs. I would wager one of my all-time favorite games, if not my favorite game of all time, Knights of the Old Republic, probably had like a good solid 3 playthroughs in it before you started to overlap so much it wasn't necessarily worth playing, a 4th time for new content.
That's a good point. Like some of these endings, what was that game we did the testing for? Oh, well, I mean, Cyberpunk is probably a good example. We did so much testing. If you guys watched that critique we did on the main channel, we went back and we did like the branching narrative stuff. We went and we tried out the, like we had to go all the way back to the Voodoo Boys quest line, like halfway through the main story. And I had to redo a section of that mission and a dialogue selection there. And then I had to carry all the way through to the ending again to see that like crazy ending where you go with Keanu and like basically run a suicide mission effectively. And it was super cool that there were that many endings and decisions and discussions you had, like at the dump. You go to the big dump with Johnny Silverhand, and then based on your dialogue options there, that can affect whether you're given the option for that secret ending. And I like that kind of thing, but the ending ended up being just identical to one of the other endings with like a slightly different camera shot during one of the final pans, basically. Like it ended up being a total waste. Like I could say, oh, I got the secret ending, but it like other than me just saying it, I didn't get anything really unique or interesting out of it. It was just a thing that happened. And so I hope that the endings have a little more significance than that, personally. Elden Ring, multiple endings. Okay. To be fair, if there's one studio who can pull this off, it's Larian. They've proven what they can do with this type of game with Divinity Original Sin. Yeah, absolutely. Like, if you've never played a game from Larian, I can't stress enough just how insane the branching narratives are here. Like, if you liked Detroit Become Human for branching narratives and stuff, you ain't seen nothing yet. This studio is mad. They're wizards, like I said.
I have played the game way more than that amount of times just because I love that game. But if you're just talking about seeing new content, I don't think you're going to get much after a 3rd playthrough. However, in Baldur's Gate 3, I think that's different. I think you're going to continue to see things in 5, 6, 7, 8 playthroughs that you never saw before, and in a quantity that's enough that it will propel you to keep playing more playthroughs. And even if the average person only plays 2 or 3 playthroughs, I think it's going to be a higher average than any other RPG of this type that's seen before. So obviously, part of this is the classes, subclasses, races, these things.
Also, can we give a shout out to the devs and to the marketing team for actually getting in costume for the presentation? Can you imagine, just for a second, join me on this adventure. Imagine if for the Starfield reveal, Todd Howard just walks out really clunkily onto like their little stage in a spacesuit, and it's like so puffy he can't walk right. This game represents the start of a new generation of Bethesda open world adventures. Like, it would have been so good, dude. And then for the whole video, the whole presentation, everybody they talk to is in a full astronaut suit. Dude, that would be great. We need to normalize this. I want this from now on. Like the Pikmin presentations, all of the Nintendo guys are wearing Pikmin outfits. Dude, it would help me get immersed. I'd be more likely to pre-order. Like, why not? 16 times the astronomy. Yeah, exactly.
Not only impact your dialogue options in terms of what you see on the screen, which further impacts your replayability, but also from a gameplay perspective, which is not something we've talked about really in this video yet, is these things also impact your gameplay. How do you approach objectives? How do you solve problems? How do you play in combat? What abilities, what tactics do you use in combat because of your class, your subclass? Did you multi-class? How did you multi-class your character? So all that adds a new experience to the playthrough that keeps it fresh, I think, while you're exploring and receiving new cutscenes and seeing things you didn't see before. it's going to keep the combat somewhat fresh for you compared to one of these other games I mentioned, these all-time greats, where those things aren't necessarily that different. Obviously, those games have different classes as well that help to keep things fresh. But I think in terms of the amount of customization for your characters, the amount of classes you could play, the amount of subclasses, the different degrees of multi-classing you could do, I don't think we've seen an RPG with quite this extent, unless you count something like Pathfinder, which obviously is kind of the king of that. But in the sense, that game doesn't have, in my opinion, quite the amount of permeations that Baldur's Gate 3 does. So you're sacrificing some of that character customization in Baldur's Gate 3, but you're gaining a lot more in terms of outcomes and decisions and obviously, cutscenes that you're going to see in its place. And sort of wrapped inside this discussion is respecing, right? Whether this actually harms the replayability of the game or improves it. And I know a lot of people out there are saying, well, if you can respec, then why go through the game as another class or anything different when you can just respec and play that and you don't have to create a new character?
I think respecing is generally good. I appreciate respecing. I don't know. Do you guys care about respecing in a game like this? I don't think it's that big of a deal. As far as I can tell, and as far as I'm concerned, it just sort of allows you, if you're like, we've all been there where we're playing a game where you boot it up, you choose one character archetype, you start playing, and it's just not clicking. It's just not, it doesn't feel good. And frankly, if you get 5 to 10 hours into a game and it's still not clicking, there's something about it that's just not working. Like, a lot of people are just going to set the controller down and move on rather than continue playing. Whereas respecing, okay, well, I don't lose all of that progress. I don't have to start over 10 hours back. I can just continue on with a different, like, play style or loadout, whatever I choose to do. Have an in-game cost. Like, don't make it free. Don't let somebody just be like, oh, I just reached a really hard charisma check. Let me go respec for free real quick, and then I'll come back and I'll pass the charisma check, and then I'll respec back to what I was. Make it expensive. Make it a big deal in game. I'm fine with that. Just like with Elden Ring. I thought Elden Ring handled this really, really well, because if I remember correctly, it was basically like you had to defeat very difficult bosses to earn basically a unit of currency that could be spent doing this. Or was it not even bosses? Or was it stuff that was actually hidden out in the world? I thought it was like boss stuff. I don't know. It's been but the point is, it was a limited item that was not easy to acquire. Like, it was kind of tough. Like, oh yeah, it was mini bosses. Like, there was one where it was a big bear. Yeah, now it's coming back to me. But yeah, the point is, it was not easy. It wasn't something you just waltzed in and did, but I thought that was great, because in my first Elden Ring playthrough, I think I played 2 or 3 different archetypes. I started with like the priest build out, very magic focused, doing all that craziness with Combat de Jour and just totally breaking the game that way. And then I shifted into like an intelligence build, and I tried like the Sword of Night and Flame, and then like even after the fix, even after they patched it and nerfed it, it still was very, very powerful. And then I went and I tried doing like the big great sword builds, and then the sort of long sword builds. Like, I experimented so much just in my first playthrough of Elden Ring, because they empowered you to respec, and because it was expensive to do and not just a walk in the park waltz type of thing. When I chose to respec, it was a big decision. It was like, okay, I'm gonna do it. Here's the leap of faith. We're gonna see if this was a good idea. It ended up being a good idea.
And I'm kind of in the opposite camp. I actually think respecing in this game will actually improve replayability, and I'll elaborate here on why that is. I think it's fair to say that a fair amount of new players are going to be playing Baldur's Gate 3. What I mean by new players, I mean players that didn't play Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, players that are not overly familiar with D&D and video games, because, to be honest, there are not a ton of them outside of Pathfinder recently, which is based off D&D. There are not a ton of D&D recent video games. There just aren't. So I think it's fair to expect a lot of RPG enthusiasts to be playing this game that are not familiar with D&D. And when they go to select their class and their subclass, they're going to try and find something that they want to play that's close to what they might like to play in other RPGs. So they're going to pick their class and subclass based on this fact. And they may get it wrong some of the time. I expect some of them to get it wrong. I expect some of them to think they knew how a class or subclass played, but then once they played it, they decided it's not really for them. And this might take a while. It might take a little bit of game time for them.
Exactly. I fully expect to screw up a lot. And I play a good number of these games, but I fully expect that I'm going to experiment a lot because every game's different. Even if you've played the other Baldur's Gate games, I'm sure you're going to jump into this one and you might like the feel of one build versus another.
And to really realize this, and they might want to make a subtle change, like, maybe I got the right class, but maybe I want to change my subclass and play a different subclass that looks a little bit cooler. Or maybe they are playing like a wizard, but they go, you know what, like sorcerer actually seems more my jam than wizard. So I want to change to sorcerer and try out sorcerer, even though I like wizard. Sorcerer might be closer to what I'm playing. I think this is a probability for a lot of players. And the crux of the situation is, if those players had to restart the game, let's say they played 10 hours in, 15 hours in, before they realized it's not...
No, is he going to say like the exact same thing I said? I should have watched this before rambling.
Not really the class for me. I know I have about 100 hours or something to go, a lot of hours. It's easier for me to just start over now than it is to keep playing the whole game as a class that I don't really like. So they go and they change their class, or maybe they just change their subclass and they start over. Maybe some of those players get it wrong again, or maybe they've played far enough into the game that when they start over, they're just not as enthusiastic about starting the game over again, and they put the game down and don't play as much. I am guilty of playing 10 to 12 hours into a game, realizing that I'd be better off with a different build that's maybe similar but slightly different, starting over, doing this time and time again, and then eventually getting to the point where I sort of burn out before I've even made it through one act. This has happened to me countless times with games, particularly before I got into the gaming industry, since it's more...
Well, it's just so frustrating because you've put all of these hours in trying to get used to this build, and then you realize this just isn't working. You find the fix. You find the remedy. Just respec. It's going to be fine. And then you realize, oh, wait, the only way to respec in this game is to start over with a new character. Crap. And then you're like, do I really want to go through the last 10 hours again that I just saw? You know, it's not like some of these games where you've put it down for 6 months and then you jump back in. Like, it's kind of a big deal to go back when you're only 10 hours in, you just started the game, and then you just have to redo all of it. That sucks. It sucks. I'm still pissed that I was playing Metroid Dread and then they did some sort of update and it corrupted my save file and I had to start over. I was like at the final boss encounter. I haven't gone back since. I never finished that game just because I was so pissed that I lost my save file, and the idea of going back through all of that from scratch really made me ornery. It took me that long to think of that word. I'll tell you what, I'm a little fried. Would you critique Baldur's Gate 3? I'd like to, but as we're understanding in this video, this game is so huge, I don't even know where I would begin. Like, how do you do a comprehensive video on this game and make it make sense in terms of time investment, in terms of the cost of like my time, my editor's time, paying him to cut this thing together? Like, it's a lot of work to make one of those big critiques. And I think something like this probably needs a 10, 15-hour treatment if you're doing it right, you know? Just do it based on your playthrough. Yeah, I mean, that's probably how I would have to do it. So yeah, I agree. But then it's not really the ultimate critique, so I probably wouldn't call it a critique. I'd probably wrap it in a shell, a tortilla, perhaps, of another kind of angle on the topic. Like looking at the depth of conversational consequence in Baldur's Gate 3, something like that. But with a nicer, more catchy name.
You know, I'm more driven by content now than I was then. But this has happened to me numerous times, and I know from talking to other players this happens to them as well. So I think what respecing can do for a player is prevent that feeling and allowing them to make a subtle change to their build, then allows them to enjoy their playthrough without having to go back to the beginning and starting over one, maybe two times. I think there's a tendency for people to think when they hear respecing, well, if there's respecing, then why would anyone ever play another class? And it's like, most players are not going to play the game as a fighter starting out and then jump to a wizard and go, oh, I really wanted to play a wizard, I'm going to play that. And then, you know, a quarter of the way through the game, go like, now I'm going to play a rogue. Like, first of all, itemization would probably make that very, you know, unfulfilling to do. But I think that's probably not the normal player, right? The normal player may decide, hey, I'm playing a fighter, I really want to play a wizard, I'm going to change to wizard. But that it's probably will stop there. They'll play as a wizard the rest of the way. Or maybe they'll play as a wizard and realize they picked the wrong school of wizard and they want to change the school of wizard one other time. But
Hogwarts! Sorry, I heard School of Wizard and I had to.
I don't think you're going to see people just leapfrogging around from class to class, playing every single class in a single playthrough, and then going, you know what, I don't want to play a new playthrough because I've seen every class. I just don't think that's the case. And another thing to remember too is keep in mind that your race is fixed, right? Like once you change or select your race, you're not going to be able to change that. So, and that has implications dialogue-wise and story-wise, but it also has, you know, visual appearance. People may like the look of their race or not like it, and they'd have to start over in that case. And I think players, that will add something in subsequent playthroughs. Even if you played the same class, if you played a different race, you're going to be seeing different content. So there is something to be said for that as well.
Yeah, if you played Divinity Original Sin 2, you know that some of the people in this world are like super racist, and they might not like you as a lizard boy. They might not like you as a human or as a walking skull. Like they might just not like you simply because of your race. And that can have tons of different consequences within the story. It's like, oh, I need to get past this person who has information I need, but they hate my race. So they're just not going to give it to me. So I have to find another solution. Whereas in another playthrough, you play as a human and they're cool with humans. So they tell you what's up. All of a sudden, totally different playthrough, totally different gameplay funnel into another area. You know, it's pretty wild. Yeah, just like real life. There was a game that people got pissed that, Mafia 3. You guys remember Mafia 3? Everybody freaked out that, I don't know. Okay, everybody didn't freak out. There were a couple of articles written. I exaggerated a little. There were a couple of articles written where the journalists, in quotes, were pissed off that in Mafia 3, if you went into some of these stores, they would racially profile the character that you're playing because he is he's African American, and it's like in the South in the 60s, and so they see somebody that's black come into the store, and in the game, like, the store owner will kick you out. He'll call the cops on you for being in a whites only restaurant. And people like freaked out about that, and like these journalists were like, we just thought that gaming was supposed to be an escape from racism, not a reminder of it. I'm like, dude, it's a game set basically in New Orleans in the 60s. Shocker. If they want to do anything relatively accurate to the time period, even though it's fictionalized, it's still clearly inspired by that, as they've said many, many times. Why would they just like erase that? And if they erased it and pretended like everything was hunky-dory, those same people would be pissed off in the same way, you know? Like, it's like, damned if you do, damned if you don't. If they reflect history realistically in that way, then they're reminding people of racism. But then if they don't depict it, then they're erasing the history of it in this video game so people don't have to think about it. There's no way to win, you know? It was just so dumb. But I think games like this that reflect a little bit of our world and some of the negatives of it, such as bigotry or racism or stuff in the game world, it ties it together. It makes it much more believable because that stuff is so innate to our existence. Like, of course it makes sense that some people don't trust weird lizard creatures. Oh my God, did you hear Luke? Luke just called the lizard weird. Yeah, I did. Sure did. I'm a lizard hater, I guess. Like my daddy and his daddy for him.
And lastly, something I mentioned earlier in the video, but I haven't discussed at length here, and something we talked a bit about in the last video, is companions, right? These characters all have different storylines, and whether you selected an origin character or decided to bring X characters along or change the characters that you're bringing along, you're going to see and have reactions to things that are different depending on which characters you have. And I'm 99% sure that a lot of those interactions with those characters are going to depend on whether they approve of you or not, how much they approve of you. So obviously, if you have their approval, they're probably going to react to you differently than if they hate your guts. I mean, that's just, you know, how good writing works. So you could have different outcomes with the same characters as somebody else based on the decisions that you made along the way. So I don't think a lot of people are taking that into account into how much that's going to impact future playthroughs as well. I mean, not only do you have the things I mentioned before, but also all these companions you can bring or not bring with you and their dynamics between them and how they react to you and the stories that are being told. All those things influence replayability because maybe you have like 5 companions you really like, but you can only bring 3 with you. So that means you need another playthrough just to see the other 2. And then maybe after you do that, you want to see some of the other ones. So there's a lot of things to factor into replayability, but I think it's probably one of the best aspects of Baldur's Gate 3, and it's probably one of the most compelling arguments for Game of the Year. I mean, how many games have this much for...
I'm on board with getting excited about Baldur's Gate 3 because this is an instance where we've actually seen the game, and many of us have actually played it already. So it's not like we're going in without knowing what this game is going to be like. You know, at this point, it's just a matter of questioning how crazy is this going to be, not whether it's going to be crazy. However, I do want to just acknowledge that it's kind of funny that the game hasn't technically launched yet, and it's already being discussed as like, this is why it could win Game of the Year. It's a little funny. It's a little funny.
Variety, this many variables. I don't think, from a wiki perspective, we're obviously working on the wiki for the game. I don't know how long it's going to take us to get all this information in there in terms of possible cutscenes, possible outcomes. I mean, we're really going to be relying on the Baldur's Gate 3 community to help fill that out, because
shout out to them too. I always wondered like how that happens, how these wikis get built, because some of it of course is like data mining, but the more official stuff, I always wondered if the devs work direct with them and help walk them through it. Like, do the devs provide any information about it? Do the devs walk them through? Oh yeah, this is how this works. I've just always wondered about that. Like, do they actually help at all? I guess not.
There's just so much. I mean, if I sat here and played through the game every day for a year, I don't think I would have every outcome that you could possibly have in this game. And players are going to want the information on
not with that
so
attitude.
Obviously, we're relying on a lot of people to help fill that in. But that's incredible, right? I mean, DOS 2 had a lot of variety and things that you can do, and it took a while to get these things into the wiki. Pathfinder as well, but not to the extent that Baldur's Gate 3 has, and I simply cannot think of a game that even comes close. So that kind of wraps up my video on replayability, the length of this game. Another reason I think it's going to be Game of the Year. It's not the only reason, but this is a big one. I mean, how much content can you get out of this game that's not just repeat content? And is it good enough for you to want to do it? I think the answer to that is it's a lot, and yes, it's good enough. And, I want to hear from you guys. Are you guys planning on playing the game multiple?
I mean, I guess I just need to know what he means by Game of the Year. If he means like his selection for Game of the Year, yeah, I'm sure it will win. Just based on how he's describing it, yeah, I'm sure. But as for like the Jeff Keighley, the Geoff Keighley Game of the Year at the Game Awards, I would be really surprised if this is even like seriously in the running, because it seems to me that show is so built on mass market appeal. It's probably going to be Zelda, or in an alternative universe, maybe Hogwarts Legacy. But like, I just can't imagine that they give it to a pretty hardcore RPG like this. Maybe they do, but I would be very, very surprised. He took my thing.